Hello, I am Professor Mandy Rispoli. I'm a professor of special education at the University of Virginia. And today I'm going to be talking with you about teaming with paraprofessionals to support learners with autism. Helen Keller has a quote that says, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." And I think this is really fitting for the work that we do within schools. Special education is not an individual sport, right? This is all about teams and collaboration. And one of the most important members of our teams are paraprofessionals. With all these interventions that we have to support students with autism and other disabilities, it's important to remember that oftentimes the ones on the front lines, so the ones actually implementing these practices, are not special education teachers, but paraprofessionals. In 2019, there were over 1.3 million paraprofessionals employed in US public schools. And we have a history of showing that there are actually more paraprofessionals than there are teachers. So with this number of paraprofessionals, we have to think a little bit about what are their roles and responsibilities. And so think for a second about all the roles and responsibilities your paraprofessionals might be engaging in. Perhaps they're helping with toilet training. Perhaps they're helping assist a student in a general education classroom. Perhaps they are delivering instruction in small or individual groups. Perhaps they are co-teaching with you in your classroom. Perhaps they're running around the building trying to grab materials and support accommodations and modifications as the students travel throughout different areas of the school. So these are lots of different roles and responsibilities that paraprofessionals have to engage in, and yet we also know that they are very undertrained in any of these areas. So the requirements for becoming a paraprofessional vary from state to state, but often do not require content knowledge or expertise in instructional delivery. In fact, when we talk to paraprofessionals, we learn that they recognize they want training and they have lack of knowledge in things like instructional practices, behavioral interventions, or systems to support behavior, like positive behavior supports. With this limited training, unfortunately, many paraprofessionals only receive training on the job. So opportunities for workshops or for courses are really limited across the country. And so we end up with personnel shortages. We end up with limited resources that we can allocate to paraprofessional training. And we also sometimes have administrators who maybe don't understand the role or the importance of paraprofessionals, and so thus are not allocating resources to support their training and professional development. All of this comes together to leave paraprofessionals with really on-the-job training. And who is that on-the-job training provided by? Most often it's the special education teacher. So how are teachers trained to work with paraprofessionals? Well, this also brings up some challenges because most teachers tell us they haven't had any training in working with paraprofessionals. Most teachers pre-service programs really don't focus on working with other adults. The primary focus is on how to work with students or learners. Teachers also report that they have limited time to plan or to provide on-the-job feedback to paraprofessionals. And we also know that there are few systems level structures that actually support collaboration between teachers and paraprofessionals. Fortunately, we have a lot of research that shows us exactly how to most effectively train and support paraprofessionals. We know that best practices for training paraprofessionals include the principles of behavioral skills training. That means written instructions, verbal instructions, and an opportunity for practice and feedback. Written instructions for paraprofessionals can look like one-page overviews. Maybe it's an article that's written for lay audiences in terms of a specific practice or strategy. We can also provide paraprofessionals with flowcharts that show step-by-step how to implement a specific intervention or instructional practice. And we can also use task analysis to break down broader skills into specific steps. that paraprofessionals can then practice and check off as they complete. In terms of verbal instruction, what we know is that telling is helpful, but telling and showing is more helpful. And so when we provide verbal instruction, we want to make sure that we're giving specific examples of what this practice might look like and why this practice is important. So not just what to do, but why do we do this? So if we're facilitating social interaction on the playground, these are the strategies to use, and this is why that's going to help facilitate this child's integration with his peers. In terms of feedback, most of the time, feedback provided to paraprofessionals is verbal, although some teachers may also want to provide written feedback, either through a chart or a graph or just a note, so that the paraprofessional can take that feedback and incorporate that into her future practices. We also know that modeling or showing is really critical, and so this might look like instructional videos that you can find online. This might look like practicing together or demonstrating the practice or the intervention for the paraprofessional, or even role playing, where you can take turns being the learner and then being the paraprofessional. These are the key ingredients for training all adult learners, but specifically paraprofessionals. Written and verbal instruction, an opportunity for practice with feedback, and modeling. So again, this is what we call behavioral skills training. And we've done a lot of work in this space with training teachers and having teachers support and train paraprofessionals. So written and verbal instruction, model the skill, practice the skill, often through a role play. That's a really safe way to practice. We can make mistakes, we can pause, we can talk about things, and we can try again. And then providing that performance feedback. And when we talk about performance feedback, we're talking about two types of feedback. One is supportive feedback, where we might acknowledge or call attention to things that the paraprofessional did well. And the other is constructive feedback, where we may want to offer some opportunities for growth or for reflection or for adapting or changing the implementation of the practice. So we know we can train paraprofessionals. We know, though, that one-shot training is not effective in changing anybody's practices. In order to change practices in the classroom, we have to provide ongoing support. So I'm going to share with you one model of providing ongoing support. It's a coaching model called practice-based coaching. And this coaching model really becomes the link between the content we provide with behavioral skills training and the implementation of that content within the classroom. So practice-based coaching was originally developed by Pat Snyder, Mary Louise Hemeter, and Lisa Fox in 2015. There are different iterations of practice-based coaching, but this is the Anita Zucker Center model at the University of Florida that we have used in our work and have adapted. So here's the framework for practice-based coaching. At the outer rim, you see a green circle that says collaborative coaching partnership. And that's really the foundation for good coaching. That partnership is between the paraprofessional and the teacher. With that partnership, we can establish trust and rapport in a space where we can try things out, make mistakes, get feedback, and then correct those errors. So the collaborative coaching partnership is really at the foundation of a coaching, of practice-based coaching. At the very center of the model, we have effective teaching practices. And this is what I love about practice-based coaching, is you can place any practice into the center of that visual, and you can use practice-based coaching around it. So maybe you're working with your paraprofessional on helping students stay engaged during large group instruction, right? So then we could talk about those engagement strategies, and those strategies become the focus of our coaching. Maybe you have a paraprofessional who's working with a student who has challenging behavior, and the effective teaching practice is implementing behavior prevention strategies. And so then that becomes the focus of coaching. So you can put anything you want to in the center of this model. With that, once we've identified what practice we want to be working on, then we work together, the teacher and the paraprofessional, to create a goal around that practice. And this is what's really unique about practice-based coaching, is this is not a do it for someone else. This is work together. This is doing with. So the paraprofessional is a very important person within this coaching model. They're driving their own professional development with your help as the teacher, as a coach and facilitator. So together you come up with a goal that the paraprofessional would like to work on, and then you break that goal into action steps. From here, we then observe the use of those practices in relation to that goal. So if my goal was to implement the behavior intervention plan 3 times a day, then I'm going to go and observe and see if I'm actually doing it 3 times a day. I take that data from the focused observation and I reflect on it. Oh man, I only got twice today. I need to do a little bit thinking about how I could create a space to implement this intervention 3 times tomorrow. During this reflection, we have the coach and the coachee, so the teacher and the paraprofessional, coming together to jointly reflect on the progress towards the goal. So again, we're working together as a team. No one is just receiving coaching. We're active in this partnership. So that's a brief overview of practice-based coaching, and now we'll dig into each of those elements in more detail. This is another way to conceptualize the practice-based coaching cycle. So oftentimes we start with a teaching practice that we need to have implemented with a student. And the first step is to figure out kind of our present level of performance, right? So what is the paraprofessional view as strengths of theirs in this area? What might be some areas that they're less comfortable in? And what might be some of their priorities? So that's the needs assessment. I'll show you a needs assessment in just a moment. But the needs assessment then informs the goals that the paraprofessional and the teacher jointly set. Those goals inform the steps to take to make sure those goals can be achieved, their action planning. Then we conduct focused observations. It's called focused because we're just interested in that specific goal, that one practice that we're working on. And then we come together to jointly reflect and provide feedback on the progress towards that goal. Practice-based coaching is a cycle, which means it can continue, and we can continue to conduct more needs assessments, set new goals, select new practices. So this process can continue in perpetuity. Here's an example of a strengths and needs assessment that we've used in some of our prior work. So you can see at the top of this chart, the paraprofessional is asked some questions about their use of specific practices. They're asked to rate their knowledge of the practice, their comfort of the practice. They're asked to tell us if they'd like to use that practice more often or more accurately. And then they're asked to reflect a little bit on how much support they would need to be able to use that practice. So that structure for columns 2, 3, 4, and 5 can stay the same across strengths and needs assessments. The thing that we can change is that very first column, because the content there reflects the practice that we're wanting to teach the paraprofessionals. So here, this is an example of a strengths and needs assessment for function-based interventions. And so you can see we've outlined specific practices within function-based intervention. So for each of those practices across each row, the paraprofessional will rate their knowledge, comfort, whether they want to use it more often or more accurately, and how much support they would need. So you can use this exact structure and just replace the practices in the first column. It's important here that we look at both things the paraprofessional is reflecting on that they're doing well, so the strengths, as well as some areas that they might want additional support in, the needs. Those two things can come together for us to be able to leverage those strengths in a way that supports the areas in which the paraprofessional would like to grow or to develop more. So if a paraprofessional on a strengths and needs assessment indicates that there's a practice that maybe they don't know a lot about and that they would like to use more often and that they do need some support in, then that practice might become a goal that can be the focus of practice-based coaching. When we're thinking about goals, we want to think about setting goals that are achievable, right? We want to set realistic goals so that our team can contact reinforcement, but we also want to set high goals. right? We want to push a little bit so that these practices are either implemented more accurately or more frequently with their students. So we sort of have the Goldilocks test here, right? So we don't want a goal that's too difficult that we can't achieve it, or a goal that's so simple that we really don't even need coaching around it, right? So we're trying to find that perfect fit in the middle. Here's an example of a goal planning form. So again, the teacher and the paraprofessional can work on this together, where the paraprofessional looks at the strengths and needs assessment, identifies from that a strength that they have, and an area of difficulty or an area in which they'd like to improve. They may have lots of strengths and lots of areas that they want to improve in. The job of the teacher here is to help the paraprofessional kind of whittle that down to a single priority. Okay, we may have lots we want to tackle. What are we going to tackle first? Remembering that we can continue the coaching cycle with multiple practices over time. So here's an example of a goal setting form that's completed. So the paraprofessional notes that she's got really great rapport with this student, but sometimes may forget to leave out some of the steps when there are too many steps in an instructional practice or intervention to implement. So her priority is to implement all 5 steps of the intervention perfectly, 100% accuracy, at least 3 times in a row. Here's some more examples of goals. So maybe we want to be working on behavior-specific praise, so telling a child exactly what they did well, so that they can do that behavior again in the future. And so maybe the teacher says, I'm going to review classroom expectations so that I can catch the kids being good, so that I can then deliver this behavior-specific praise. And then the goal might be, I'm going to praise child behaviors that meet those classroom expectations at least 10 times every morning for 5 days in a row. So just as we're writing measurable goals for student learners, we're also writing measurable goals for paraprofessionals. Maybe also another area is to teach and remind children of the classroom expectations. And so maybe the paraprofessional says, I'm going to update the classroom expectations that have, so that there's rules with pictures next to them. And I'm going to bring this to circle time in the morning. And then during circle time each day for the next 3 weeks, I'll teach and review the rules by referring to the pictures and giving reminders using positive phrasing. So really discrete, simple behaviors or practices that the paraprofessional is working to implement. So now we've covered the needs, strengths and needs assessment and goal setting. Now it's time to start into putting those goals into action. So we start talking about action planning. For the special education teacher, here's some guiding questions to talk through with your paraprofessionals. 1, what is the paraprofessional's goal? What do they want to be working on? 2, where and when will they need to use that practice? So if they're working on teaching the child requesting skills during meal times, it would make sense that we would then focus on those practices during snack and during lunch. Asking the paraprofessional how he or she or they will implement a plan to improve this practice. So what are you going to do differently to either increase the frequency with which you're using this practice, or maybe you're really just trying to use it better, right? So more accurately. How will we know when the goal is met, and what sorts of supports might the paraprofessional need to use these practices or this practice? So these are guiding questions that the teacher and the paraprofessional should talk through together so that they can come up with a plan to help the paraprofessional reach their goal. Critical to all of this is an opportunity to use the practices that are the focus of the practice-based coaching. So we want to go back to the action plan and look at where and when this practice was to be used, look at this daily schedule of the paraprofessional and the students that they're supporting, thinking about staffing arrangements. Maybe there need to be some changes made so that the paraprofessional has more opportunity to practice this skill in small group or with an individual learner. Maybe there's some changes that might need to be made to the classroom environment so that the paraprofessional can actually have an opportunity to practice these skills. So all of this planning is essential before we send a paraprofessional out to go and do this new intervention, right? We're thinking about what they do well, we're thinking about goals, we're developing action plans, and we're putting in place supports and structures so that they can actually practice this skill. Here's an example of an action planning form. We usually do this right back to back on a single page. So we have the goal on one side, and then we've got the action planning on the other, because we don't need lots of papers floating around, right? We want to make this really efficient and streamlined. And so here, the paraprofessional and teacher might, again, write down the goal, what materials they might need in order to reach that goal, resources that are necessary to achieve the goal, and then planning ahead for hiccups, right? What are some anticipated challenges? Well, it's my first day implementing this behavior support plan, and my guess is the child is going to continue to have challenging behavior despite the implementation of this plan, because it's only day one, right? What am I going to do to prevent those challenges? It's also critical that we build in natural reinforcement for using these practices. So how will achieving this goal be reinforcing for the paraprofessional? How will it help them? And more importantly, how will it help the students? Right? So we're tying back these practices into natural reinforcers. The last piece is a timeline. We like to see goals that can be achieved maybe within 1 to 3 weeks, right? If we go much longer than that, we can start to feel frustrated and lose some motivation to keep working on this practice. So what's the timeline to reach this specific goal? And here's an example of a completed action planning form. The paraprofessional is going to implement all 5 steps of the intervention with 100% accuracy 3 times in a row. What do they need to do that? They need a timer, and they need a checklist of all the procedures they're supposed to be implementing. What resources do they need? The coach, or the teacher in this case, on standby. What are their anticipated challenges? That they may forget to praise the child. And what are they going to do to prevent that challenge? They're going to underline the word praise on the intervention checklist to cue them to make sure that they're praising that student's behavior. Achieving the goal will help me engage the student meaningfully in circle time. And it will help the student replace challenging behavior with appropriate communication. So we're building in those natural reinforcers, and they're giving themselves a week to measure that or to master that goal. So if we come back to our practice-based coaching cycle, we've started with the strengths and needs assessment. That informs the goal, which informs our action plan. Now it's time to actually go in and observe the paraprofessional implementing this new practice. Practice-based coaching uses the word focused observation. And this, I think, is really helpful because as special education teachers, there's a lot going on in the classroom. And it can become easy to be distracted by some of these other practices or nuances that we're observing. In practice-based coaching, the practice is the focus. And so we're doing a focused observation just of that one practice that's listed as the paraprofessional's goal. This helps us to make sure that our observations are focused or only, I can't think of another word besides focused, but focused on the practice at hand. So in a focused observation, we gather implementation about the teaching practices that are supposed to be used during classroom instruction. And we can observe those practices either live, where someone is sitting down and just watching, or if that is not feasible, we can also conduct focused observations through recorded videos. This can be really helpful when we are stretched thin with our scheduling and staffing resources, and we don't have a teacher's availability to sit down and watch the paraprofessional work directly with the student. In that case, video recording is a great alternative. So within focused observations, what we're really doing is monitoring progress. And so we want to think about, what's the best way to monitor this paraprofessional's progress? Is it in the moment? Is it through video recording? Maybe we're just interested in oral instructional practices, so we could just do an audio recording. What materials are we going to need to be able to conduct this focused observation? Do we need a specific checklist that we can mark through? Do we need other equipment? Do we need additional time or maybe staff coverage so that we can pause and observe the paraprofessional implementing these practices? So the focused observation form doesn't have to be very fancy. Here we just have specific practices we want the paraprofessional or the teacher to be implementing, and we just score yes or no. Yes, you did that step, or no, you didn't do that step. And so again, this list of practices is specific to whatever the paraprofessional's goal is. So for focused observation, as I noted, if you're not able to sit down and observe live, video recording is an excellent alternative. Another alternative is to help the paraprofessional to self-monitor their own use of those practices. So self-monitoring is where we observe our own behaviors, we record those observations, we go back and we look at what we've noted and we make decisions. So just like what we do with students, we're doing the same thing, but with ourselves. Self-monitoring is low cost, right? We don't need additional people. We just need maybe a piece of paper or even an app. We know that with self-monitoring, sometimes we can get really accurate self-evaluations. And we know that this then drives improved teaching practices, which of course drives improved student outcomes. So we have lots of research that shows how we can teach teaching staff to use self-monitoring. We can teach teachers and paraprofessionals to use self-monitoring related to instructional practices. We can also help folks decrease their use of ineffective practices. We have also have data that shows that we can use self-monitoring to improve the implementation of behavior interventions. Teachers are some of the most creative people I know, and so I'm sure you will come up with lots of great ideas for how you might self-monitor, but maybe you have note cards, maybe there's an app, maybe you're using a counter, maybe you're using paper clips where you start with your paper clips in one pocket at the beginning of the day. Every time the paraprofessional uses behavior-specific praise, she moves the paper clip to the other pocket. And at the end of the day, counts the paper clips in her second pocket. The hardest part is remembering which pocket you started with on that one. You can also use masking tape around your wrist where you can tally mark practices as you go. So the self-monitoring is for the paraprofessional to document their own use of practices related to their goal. So we're not measuring student behavior here. We're just measuring our own use of practices. And so that's lovely. Data collection is lovely, but it's only useful if we're actually making decisions based on those data. So it's important to turn those data into pictures, for example, with a line graph. So here's a paraprofessional's praise practices. On the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we have days of the week. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have the frequency of times they use behavior-specific praise. And all the paraprofessional does is tally at the end of the day, how many times did I praise? And then we plot that on a graph. Now that it's on a graph, we can make some more informed decisions. We can say, gosh, it looks like you really increased your use of praise Monday, Tuesday, all the way to Wednesday, and then it's held steady. Maybe holding steady is great. Maybe that's the optimal praise level, right? 10 is what we were shooting for. Maybe there's more to go. Maybe we've sort of plateaued and we want to keep moving forward. And so this data then informs the coaching and the feedback that the teacher can provide to the paraprofessional. So we collect data through focused observations, and we turn those data into graphs so we can make decisions. Okay, so what should teachers do? Well, teachers can support paraprofessionals to self-monitor their own practices. Teachers can graph the data for the paraprofessionals and then bring those graphs to their meetings. Alternatively, paraprofessionals might be able to graph their own data and then bring those data to the meetings. Point is, when we coach, we want to have something we're coaching on. So we do need the data from the focused observations at our coaching meetings. Here's an example of a self-monitoring sheet that the paraprofessional might use. Again, practices are on the left. You can put any practices there as long as this is like broken down into very specific steps. And all the para has to do is say, yes, I remember to do that, or oops, I forgot to do that. And then we just look at the % correct at the end. And that's what we would graph. So we've talked about strengths and needs assessment that drives goal setting, that drives action planning, that then guides our focused observations. So now we have this beautiful data. What do we do with it? And this is where we come to reflection and feedback. So reflection and feedback can happen through a quick debriefing meeting. We've had teachers who are so busy, as you all are, that their coaching meetings are about 3 minutes, right? Once a day, 3 minutes, and that's sufficient for them to be able to start to have these conversations. Other times we've seen teachers and paraprofessionals who need like 45 minutes to get through things. So it just sort of depends on what the needs are and what the feasibility is within your team. But during these reflection and feedback meetings, we can debrief about how things have gone. We can communicate about progress or challenges that were faced. We can reflect on the data from the implementation of those practices through our focused observations. And really importantly is we can problem solve. So when things aren't going well or we're experiencing challenges, the teacher and the paraprofessional can work together to generate solutions to some of those barriers or problems. It's also a really good time to provide supportive feedback. Oftentimes in teams, we're only communicating about crises. And so we go maybe a whole day or even a whole week without receiving praise for our own behaviors, right? And so this gives us an opportunity to be really intentional about recognizing other people's valuable contributions or successes, or at least efforts. Right? So great reminder to provide supportive feedback to everyone on your team. So during reflection and feedback, the teacher and the paraprofessional talk about progress and challenges, they reflect, they build solutions to problems, and then maybe they set new goals or new action steps. When you're talking with paraprofessionals about their use of a practice, it can be really helpful if you video recorded it to go back to the video and say, look right here, you remembered to provide behavior-specific praise, and look how the student responded when you praise their behavior. Or let's look at this clip of morning meeting this morning. And what do you think you could have done differently to support the students' engagement? So we can use these as teaching opportunities as well as opportunities to call out really great exemplars of use of the strategies. It's also important to make sure that everyone really understands the data and understands the progress that's being monitored here. So here's where the teacher's role really becomes critical as a facilitator. And so here, the teacher is there to help guide the paraprofessional so that they can reach their own conclusions. You can do this through conversation. You can do this through asking open-ended questions like, tell me about today, or why do you think the student was so successful in inclusion math today? Or how do you think blah, 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 right? So these open-ended questions are really helpful at creating space for paraprofessionals to share and not feel like there's a right or a wrong answer. So we want to avoid those kind of test questions where there is a right or a wrong answer. Sometimes we call those closed questions. That's going to really stifle conversation, and it doesn't really help to build rapport and trust. And then this is also important, which is to avoid judgment, right? We're all on a journey. We're all trying to get better at these different practices. And so we can provide constructive feedback without rendering judgment on the individual's efforts or implementation. So when we talk about feedback, we're talking about a specific strategy, the focus of practice-based coaching. So we're just providing feedback on that one practice. Sometimes I find it helpful to write that practice at the top of my sheet so that I remember that this is the only thing I'm talking about today. There may be a lot of other things I wish I could say, but this is the focus of practice-based coaching. And then we're going to provide two types of feedback. The first is supportive feedback, just telling this paraprofessional what they did well, or even better yet, having them identify what they did well. And then constructive feedback. So what the paraprofessional should be doing differently in the future to improve their practice. Or better yet, having them identify that own constructive feedback. So in 2021, we published a paper in the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions that in which we taught teachers to serve as coaches for paraprofessionals. And the practice that we were helping teachers coach paraprofessionals on was a behavior intervention strategy called functional communication training, which is where we find out why a child is engaged in challenging behavior, and we give them a new way to communicate what they used to communicate through their problem behavior. So if I used to hit to get attention, now I'm taught to raise my hand to ask for teacher attention, right? Functional communication training. We take problem behavior, we remove it, and we put in its place a new communication strategy. So our focus here was to build capacity by training teachers who could then train and support paraprofessionals who could then implement these interventions with students so that students' outcomes would improve. So again, functional communication training is just about figuring out what the child's communicating through their behavior and then giving them a better way to say the same thing, right? So we replace challenging behavior with a new appropriate social skill or communication skill. So in functional communication training, for example, the old way the child might have communicated is when they were presented with a task demand, maybe they engaged in aggression, and then maybe they were sent to a quiet area, which means that the demand was actually removed, even if only temporarily. So the student learns, oh, in the presence of this task demand, I just need to aggress, and then I don't have to do this anymore. So we want to stop that, and instead teach a new way. So when there's a task demand, just ask for a break. So maybe we teach the student to just sign break. And when you sign break, then we're also going to remove the demand. And we're going to tell you, hey, really nice job asking me nicely for a break, right? You can have 30 seconds or a minute, and then we'll do the task again. Okay? So that's functional communication training, really effective, very powerful intervention that can be implemented by paraprofessionals. So we just need to coach them to be able to do this. So we did a teacher professional development workshop in practice-based coaching, which is, you're getting a crash course in that right now. We also train the teachers in functional communication training because we need to know how to coach and we need to know the practice that we're coaching on. Then the teachers trained the paraprofessionals in functional communication training using, surprise, behavioral skills training. So written and verbal instruction, modeling, and an opportunity for practice with feedback. That is this key ingredient to changing adult behaviors. And then we followed that with practice-based coaching to help the paraprofessionals use this practice with students in their classrooms. So these are the results from that study. These are 3 different paraprofessionals, Patty, Kara, Linda. On the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, these are our observations. Each session was a different observation. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, these are the % of steps that the paraprofessionals implemented correctly of functional communication training. So again, we're only focused on one specific practice. At the top, you can see the words baseline, PBC, and maintenance. So baseline is what was happening before we even started the study, right? So we would the teacher would tell the paraprofessional, go work with that student's challenging behavior, right? As you typically would. Then the teacher started implementing practice-based coaching, which is the second phase. And then we checked to see if that coaching led to sustained change, and that's the maintenance phase. So what I want you to notice here is that in baseline, all 3 of our paraprofessionals were doing a decent job, but certainly, excuse me, needed some support to be able to implement this intervention more effectively. And I want you to also notice that as soon as the teachers started using practice-based coaching with the paraprofessionals, every single paraprofessional's implementation improved immediately, and then continued to improve with coaching. So coaching is not a one and done, it's ongoing. So these coaches or these teachers and paraprofessionals met once a week to coach. And again, it was very brief, maybe 3 to 15 minutes long. And then they were able to maintain those skills above baseline levels after coaching was finished. So what this tells us is that maybe teachers and parents should just build into their weekly coaching sessions. And then, of course, we're only doing these practices because we want to see changes in student behavior. And so here again, we have each paraprofessional work with a student. So we have Jackson, Alistair, and Declan. And what you want to notice here is that appropriate communication, which is the open circles, increased for the students when the paraprofessionals started receiving coaching. And the students' challenging behavior decreased, those are the closed circles, when the paraprofessional started receiving practice-based coaching. So teachers can change student outcomes by focusing on paraprofessionals. That's the key ingredient here. Support for paraprofessionals drives changes in student outcomes. So some lessons learned. One is this is a broad framework, practice-based coaching, and you can customize and individualize it in a way that makes sense for you and your team. So what are your paraprofessionals' preferences and priorities? What do they want to work on? How do they want to receive feedback? What type of practice should be the focus of your coaching? And how often and in what context are you two going to meet and coach? Or maybe you're doing this with a group of paraprofessionals. That's also an option. Our recommendation is that my recommendation is that teachers can serve as coaches for paraprofessionals. Let's take this on-the-job training and tighten it up and make it effective and give teachers the skills that they need to be able to be excellent coaches for paraprofessionals. We want to make sure that this is feasible, which means it has to be brief. These coaching sessions are going to have to fit in amongst all the other things that are happening. And so when and where and how long is decided by the team. It's also really important that school administrators understand that this is part of delivering effective instruction to students with autism and other disabilities. And so what are the resources that are going to be allocated to allow teams to meet and to coach? And then finally, paraprofessional self-monitoring is a really great way to give paraprofessionals autonomy and put them in the driver's seat of their own learning and growth. Thank you so much. These resources are available, and you can also reach out to Virginia Commonwealth University ACE for additional support in this area. Thank you so much.